Here you go. The plant just blew up right in front of us. Here, let me show you another one as well.
Russian factories and oil refineries are under attack by friendly drones.
This is a strike at the heart of the Russian economy. Fuel, chemicals, energy, everything is in the crosshairs.
Even occupied Crimea got hit. One less enemy landing force on the Dnipro. The GUR is on the job. The occupiers' logistics are paralyzed and the railcars are smashed to pieces. Long-range sanctions for Russia are already in the works. Kremlin, get ready.
The president of Ukraine announced that Kyiv is ready to expand the geography of long-range strikes on Russian territory.
The GUR has reached those who committed atrocities near Kyiv. A Russian lieutenant colonel got what he deserved.
The operation was carried out with surgical precision, and it seems this is only the beginning of the list of those who will face retribution.
Ukraine continues to destroy Russian oil and gas refineries, but that's just the beginning. All this is happening on the eve of the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping. But now, friends, we'll tell you what happens next. Well, first of all, foreign partners will provide Ukraine with critically important military weapons. France is even ready to send troops to our country by 2026. In other words, that year is just a few months away. Who else will join the coalition of Friends for Ukraine, and what weapons are we supposed to receive? We'll watch a segment about this very soon. I'm Alexander Prepodobny, waiting for you in the studio. We'll discuss everything with the expert right after the segment. Let's go.
The time has come. France is ready to deploy troops for Ukraine in 2026, announced Pierre Schill, Chief of Staff of the French Army. The statement about troop deployment, came after the top. Military leadership of France warned about the need to be prepared for a confrontation with Russia in 3 to 4 years. Also, as early as next year, the Orion 26 exercises will be held to test the effectiveness of cooperation between different branches of the military, allies, and ministries.
It should be remembered that France and Emmanuel Macron were the initiators of the idea of having foreign troops present in Ukraine. Yes, they did not receive full support from their allies, not even within the European Union. Accordingly, they were forced to back down from this idea. In addition, during the Biden administration, the United States said, "We can't be at odds with Europe, but we don't want to be in Ukraine, so let's agree that you won't be there either." But now the situation is starting to change. On the one hand, Donald Trump says he does not intend to defend Europe. He does not intend to defend NATO allies. Then he changes his mind, but for Trump, that's normal. But most importantly, he says that Ukraine is a European problem, so let the Europeans deal with it.
Ukraine may soon receive additional aircraft. Mirage 2000S from France. The relevant decisions have already been made, President Volodymyr Zelensky reports.
This is a demonstration that not only the US is helping Ukraine, because there was an impression that without American weapons, nothing would happen. France is saying, no, guys, we have Caesars, we have Mirages, we have other things. Weapons that Ukraine is using effectively, so don't forget about them. And the provision of Mirages is a demonstration that we are in the game.
Experts note that Mirages are very effective weapons for shooting down the missiles that Russia uses to attack Ukraine.
Because it is our pilots flying French Mirages, just like with the F-16S. When a missile attack occurs, they take to the skies, and in the air, they intercept Russian missiles and destroy them there. And Mirages play a role here. That's why the Mirage is useful. It's not just a demonstration that France stands with Ukraine. It's also an opportunity to better repel attacks, and in the future, possibly to organize certain operations, including on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Britain is taking on the task of helping our country with air defense. In the future, the country also plans to help with missiles and the production of interceptor drones.
Back in 2023, the German Council on Foreign Relations wrote in its report that, according to their analysis, within 6 to 10 years after the end of the war in Ukraine, Russia will attack Germany. Specifically Germany, not Europe, but Germany itself will be at war. Since then, the dates have changed, how much time Russia would need, but the idea that Russia wants to go to war with Europe has not gone away. And sometimes Europeans, I emphasize, when they want to boost their geopolitical significance, recall this existential threat coming from Russia and say, we are actually ready to train and even send troops to Ukraine.
Spain and Finland have joined the PARL initiative, which allows the purchase of weapons for Ukraine from the United States using partner funds. The president of Ukraine announced this while speaking to journalists in Brussels.
Politically, it is important for Trump so that he can say, we are not helping Ukraine, we are simply selling weapons to our NATO partners, and what they do with them, whether they give them to Ukraine or not, is their own business. It is very important that, as it were, all NATO countries are involved. As many countries as possible should participate in this program. I understand that Hungary might be against it, but the main economies are involved, and it's not just Europe. By the way, Canada is also a participant in this program, and sometimes Canada has even paid for separate batches of weapons purchased from the US. And here there's a term win-win. In this case, it's a win.
Finland has also announced its contribution of 100 million euros for Ukraine. Earlier, Norway announced additional funding of $200 million. Within the framework of the PARL program, 6 NATO member countries have already financed 4 packages of defense support for Ukraine. These are the Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, and Canada.
So, friends, there are a lot of questions that have piled up. Let's figure out what weapons, especially long-range ones, Ukraine might receive in the near future. To help with this, we're bringing in expert Valery Romanenko, a leading research fellow at the National Aviation University. Valery, hello, we're glad to see you.
Yes, good evening.
Well, look, I'd like to start with this. In a recent conversation with journalists, Zelensky noted that Ukraine currently cannot obtain an air-to-air missile with the range it needs. And so far, they've only managed to reach an agreement with France regarding the Mika missile, which can hit targets at a distance of 80 kilometers. At the same time, the longest-range missile for fighter jets, which is necessary for effective counteraction, has not been specified. According to the Ukrainian president, Western partners currently have only 2 missiles with significant range. These are the AMRAAM and also the Meteor, the longest-range missile from a European manufacturer. In general, what can be done with such missiles, and how much can they help us right now? First and foremost, and what solution do you see for this situation?
Well, there's only one solution here. We need an aircraft capable of effectively using these missiles. What is the latest model of AMRAAM? It's the AMRAAM model C-8 with a range of 160 kilometers. AMRAAM, well, that's the export model, or the American model, the AMRAAM D-3. Which is supplied only to the US Air Force with a range of 180 kilometers. So 160 to 180. The Meteor is an even better missile, but let's say only certain NATO units have received this missile so far. In other words, this missile is not yet fully in production, although it's an excellent missile with a range of 200 kilometers. It incorporates the best European developments in this field, in the field of air-to-air missile creation. And it would be a fantastic weapon. But the radars on the aircraft we have, the F-16 and Mirage 2000, yes, they can only see up to 100 to 120 kilometers. So we can use these missiles effectively, for example, if we get them against Russian KAB carriers. Then why is that? Because our aircraft near the front line are forced to operate at low altitudes, otherwise they will be shot down by long-range Russian systems. And in this case, even if, let's say, an aircraft approaches and has the missile that we currently have, those early models of AMRAAM, from low altitudes in order to shoot down a KAB carrier which is located. So our aircraft is at an altitude of 100 meters, while the KAB carrier is at its standard drop altitude from 12 to 14,000 meters. That is, the missile essentially becomes a surface-to-air missile, and with the same energy, it loses half its range. As a result, a missile with a range of 160 kilometers can only hit a target at 80 kilometers. But in the case of a KAB carrier, that's acceptable for us because for the radar, it doesn't matter horizontally. Whether the missile is above or below, the radar works equally and effectively against a target in any position. But the missile, after all, has a solid fuel engine, and in order to gain altitude, it will lose range in this case. So, in principle, we could at least minimally use these missiles, American missiles, models, well, at least the C-7 with a range of 120 kilometers. But unfortunately, we were given simpler missiles, and because of this, we are currently unable to fight against Russian carriers. CAPs. But even if we get the very latest missiles, we still won't be able to fight Russian fighter jets on equal terms. Why? Radars. Weak radars. They don't allow us to see targets at such distances. In any case, we'll still be shot at in this situation. our planes, our F-16S, our Mirage 2000S. That's why, first and foremost, we need to change the hardware, we need to change the carrier. If we get the Gripen with a radar with phased array antennas that can see up to 300 kilometers, everything will fall into place. But for now, unfortunately, the situation is such that the newest types of missiles, first of all, are much more expensive. The price already reaches 2.5 million. The cost of a missile compared to older missiles of the same AMRAAM model, which costs around $1 million.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And at the same time, we'll be able to use them only in a very limited way. The situation is quite complicated, but we could use them in anti-aircraft systems like the NASAMS. And then our capabilities would also increase. Meteor, unfortunately, currently exists only in the air-to-air version and is produced in very limited quantities.
All right, Valery, here's what I want to ask you. At night, SBU strike drones hit key military infrastructure targets in occupied Crimea. The strike drones successfully hunted Russian infrastructure targets. According to sources, by morning the Russians were missing a Pantsir S2 air defense missile system worth about $20 million. In addition, SBU drones struck an oil depot in the village of Gvardeyskoye, where a considerable amount of fuel is stored. Besides that, there were also hits on oil and gas processing facilities. But I would like you to comment on Crimea. Please tell us, how much of an Achilles heel is the temporarily occupied Ukrainian peninsula for Russian air defense right now?
The thing is, the situation there is very interesting. We are destroying these radar stations with very cheap drones called Rubaka, and they are remotely controlled, almost like FPV drones. They are controlled by the operator right up until the last moment. The operator can see the targets even though the target is 300 kilometers away. Thanks to the systems we acquired from Mr. Elon Musk. That's why we're now making full use of these capabilities and destroying them. Russian radars, Russian air defense systems in Crimea. And as for the oil depots, it's only right to strike them because that's a target that even this Rubaka has a very small warhead. It's measured in single-digit kilograms. The maximum is around 10 to 12 kilograms. But that's enough for an oil depot. It's enough for a radar as well. These same drones were used to strike aircraft. That's also enough for an aircraft. But if you want to hit, for example, a ship or some industrial facility, that won't be enough. So in this case, the drone forces and special forces, the SBU, choose optimal targets and make the most efficient use of the modest resources they have at their disposal. In fact, compared to the target, a drone costs pennies against hundreds of rubles.
Yes, it's actually a great story. And how would you comment on the strikes against the Russian oil industry and the gas processing plants? I made a note here that the hits were carried out by special operations forces and they were quite significant, quite substantial over the past day. Could you please tell us, based on what you see, whether there is a trend where attempts are being made to appease Putin with sanctions, as it seems in the coming hours? Trump and Xi Jinping. Well, like the strikes on Russian oil refineries, and by the way, 3 Russian regions, not connected to each other, were hit, and these strikes have continued and will keep happening. Why is that? The Russians simply can't cover them. Can we find a way to leverage this tool?
The point is, this is a combined, so to speak, a combined set of measures against Russia so that it finally realizes that there is actually a war going on, not just a special military operation. The reason for the strikes on the oil refineries is actually very simple. As soon as we get missiles with a 1-ton warhead, oil refineries won't just be forgotten, they'll become a secondary target. Because those will be the new targets. Either drones will remain or light missiles like Ruta, which are already being used in combat conditions. Unfortunately, our drones carry a warhead of, well, at most 75 kilograms or at best 100 kilograms. That's not enough to strike at Russian long-range weapons manufacturers, but it's enough for oil refineries. Those are flammable sites, and this warhead is enough to damage an oil refinery facility, for example, a distillation column, or something similar, right? But once again, I want to stress to damage. That's the key word. Because a drone only carries 75 kilograms. If a missile hits there, then as for repairing that facility, the Russians will, well, in a month, 2 or 3, they'll get those capacities back up and running, right? But if, for example, a flamingo hits there, then all that's left is to collect the scrap metal and put out the fire, which will be abundant across the entire area, and then rebuild the refinery from scratch. That's why right now we're doing what we can, and once we get missiles, we'll do what we want.
Valerie, we can't avoid discussing a topic that's causing a huge stir in the Western world. For the past 10 days, literally day after day, Putin has been organizing events to scare the whole world with nukes. It all started with him testing the Yars missile, then they used bombers, strategic aviation, and ships. After that, it moved on to the Burevestnik, which supposedly flew for 14 or 15 hours and covered 15,000 kilometers. Today we're reading about Poseidon tests on a submarine. At the same time, Putin promises that the Sarmat intercontinental missile will soon go on duty. I want us to watch a short episode now. How all of this happened, and then I'll ask you what we should really be afraid of.
The power of the Poseidon significantly exceeds even that of our most advanced intercontinental missile, Sarmat. There is nothing like Sarmat in the world, and we don't even have it on duty yet. It will be on duty soon.
Valerie, could you please tell us, does all this weaponry really have such a serious potential to destroy Western civilization, as Putin claims? And most importantly, why is he doing this? Right now, even submarines have appeared here.
Well, all of this is nuclear weaponry. You understand that the use of nuclear weapons means the end of humanity, because if they are used against Europe, even France will immediately retaliate. They have independent nuclear forces, not dependent on anyone, not on Trump, not on anyone else. They depend solely on the decision of the president of France, whether to launch or not to launch. So if there is an attempt to strike Europe with nuclear weapons, a response will hit Russia, a response. And in fact, those old Soviet predictions of a nuclear winter will become reality. That would be the end of humanity. So Putin can try to scare people, but he fully understands how a nuclear war would end, even if he tries to use tactical nuclear weapons. And if they use Poseidon or Sarmat, which, right, Putin says they don't even have it yet themselves, but they're already using it to threaten others. An attempt to use Poseidon, that is a type of advanced nuclear torpedo weapon that would be capable of creating a massive, enormous tsunami-like wave, which would be extremely destructive. At great depth beneath the surface of the ocean, it would have the potential to wash away and obliterate everything located on the coast, for example, in countries that are situated near or adjacent to seas or oceans. Well, fine, but it would be absolutely obvious and unmistakable that Poseidon was used even before the gigantic wave actually reached the shore, due to the unique characteristics and effects of such a weapon, of any country after the launch, after the nuclear explosion. Missiles will already be missiles, British missiles, French missiles, surely missiles. American ones will already be halfway to Russia. So who is going to scare whom? Does Putin really not understand this? He understands, but he is counting on, let's say, timid politicians in Europe, on populists who just want to come to power. Well, anyway, I don't want to delve into political topics anymore. Yes, that's not my field. But threatening with nuclear strikes is still essentially, basically like saying, all right, I'll shoot myself, something along those lines. It's not even shooting yourself in the foot. It's simultaneously shooting your opponent and shooting yourself. Maybe the shot at yourself will come 15 minutes later. This is what Putin once talked about, that so we'll go to heaven and they'll all burn in fire. But still, it's unlikely that all Russians want to go to heaven together at once. Some individuals maybe, but for everyone to go together, hardly.
Yeah, he said back then, what's the point of a world without Russia? Or why do we need a world in which there is no Russia? Valerie, here's what I want to ask you regarding the implementation of the plan that Zelensky also mentioned. Purchasing 250 fighter jets may require significant funds, especially for their operation. Defense Express wrote about this. First of all, please tell me, 250 aircraft, if in an ideal scenario they were to arrive in Ukraine in the foreseeable future, how much could they change or not change the course of the war? So please tell us about this fleet of 250 aircraft, your assessment.
That is an excessive number.
Too many.
As an officer, I understand what this is about. And the main thing is not the number of planes, but their quality. We already talked at the beginning of the program about long-range missiles. You need aircraft with the appropriate radar and the appropriate missiles. It's not necessary to have 250 of them. Because Russia still has 500 aircraft of the same level. We won't be given 5th generation planes right away. It will be generation 4++. And Russia has about 500 aircraft of the 4++ generation. So it will still be half as many. But that's not what's important. What matters is the aircraft's ability to fight Russian fighters on equal terms, or better yet, with superiority in air combat, and to destroy them, to effectively destroy Russian KB carriers. Then for that, it's not necessary to have a fleet of 250 aircraft. Well, let's put it this way. What we've said is what we need. 120 Gripen-type aircraft is a more realistic figure. That's something we could actually achieve roughly by 2030. Considering that we have aircraft for performing auxiliary air defense tasks and the functions of fighter bombers, there will also remain a certain number, well, about 48 F-16 aircraft, and at least about 12 more of other aircraft. Mirage. In total, 120 Gripens plus, let's say, 40, 50, or 60 aircraft of older types. So that would be enough for us to deter Russia. And besides, I think that some agreements will be reached so that in the event of a conflict, we will receive material from our Western allies. So that if the conflict turns out to be prolonged again, we can replenish our air force, just as we did during this 3.5-year war. Because we also received about 40 aircraft and around 30 helicopters from our allies. And all of these were old Soviet models, like the MiG-29, Su-25, and helicopters like the Mi-8 and Mi-24. So that's the kind of situation we're dealing with. 200 aircraft, it's all well and good, but the country's military budget has to be able to support it. I don't think our allies will keep actively supporting us with money all the time. To maintain such a fleet, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, it might be beneficial for Europe, because with our hands, they can really keep Russia's attack dog on a leash. Because as soon as because Ukraine, let's say, stands in Russia's path to Europe.
Thank you so much. We were joined by Valery Romanenko, aviation expert and leading research fellow at the National Aviation University. All the best.
Taps.